This is the new Mini John Cooper Works GP, and it has
302 brake horsepower, a mechanical limited slip diff, lightweight forged alloy wheels, increased track and increased camber, no rear seats, an automatic gearbox. What?
Yes, you heard that correctly. The fastest, supposedly most hardcore Mini you can buy has an automatic gearbox, not a dual clutch, an actual slushbox auto. It's one of a few perplexing things about this car, but we'll come back to those in a bit, because initially I want to deal with the GP's appearance, because, well, I really rather like it. I'm not completely sold on those arch spats, but I think it's cool that they're made from the carbon fibre offcuts of BMW i3s and i8s. And the sheer exuberance of that massive rear wing and the overall stance of the GP mean it's hard not to smile at, because amongst normal traffic, this little hatchback has as much presence as a supercar. It's as head-turning as seeing Derek Zoolander on a high street. And that's despite its predominantly grey paint, which was also a feature of both previous GPs. The first generation supercharged R53 S-Works GP hit the roads back in 2006 with 215 brake horsepower and 184 pounds-foot of torque, while weighing just 1,090 kilos. The turbocharged R56 JCW GP that followed in 2013 also put out 215 brake horsepower. Torque, however, was up to 206 pounds-foot, but so was the weight at 1,160 kilos. The first generation was only so-so to drive, to be honest, but the second generation was brilliant. This latest F56 GP is the heftiest yet, at 1,255 kilos, but it also has a whole heap more grunt from its B48 engine. So, what's it like to drive?
First impressions when you get in, other than the lack of 3 pedals, are good. Basically, you sit nice and low. This wheel is nicely adjustable for reach and rake. Seats are pretty good, could perhaps do with a little more support, but by and large, not bad. And you can tell that there are no rear seats. That sense of it being stripped out is there from the get-go.
The basic Mini architecture with the relatively shallow windscreen and beefy A-pillars also lends itself naturally to a sort of touring car vibe. The short wheelbase, busy demeanour of a Mini also fits well with the up and atom ethos.
It's obviously 10mm lower than a standard JCW, and most of the time, even at low speeds, it's acceptable. It's not plush, but it just rounds off the edges of the bumps nicely. The only problem is over bigger bumps or potholes, when suddenly it just runs out of travel and you get really rather big thumps through the suspension, then not so good. This really is quick as well. 0 to 62 miles an hour is a claimed 5.2 seconds, which I suspect may be set on the optional semi-slick tyres, but nevertheless, this is a very fast hot hatch. 5.2 for a front-wheel drive car. That is impressive. If you find yourself on an autobahn or a track, this will also do 164 miles an hour flat out. It might seem a little over the top taking the back seats out, but cars without back seats, or back seats removed I should say, have rather a good history of being good to drive. You've got things like, obviously, all the various Megans, starting with the R26R, just fantastic. And then also the Golf, the Club Sport S, that was a brilliant car as well. GT3s too. Not quite the same, I know, but...
Now, while we're talking about the back seats, I think we ought to talk about the strut brace, because, well, it's not quite what it seems. In fact, a few things are a bit puzzling.
Starting with the nose scoop, which is fake on all current generation Minis. There is actually extra cooling in this car, but not through there. Then as we wander down the side, we have these arch extensions here, which look as though they should be, well, aerodynamic, but how aero-authentic can they really be, given that there's this massive great cutout here for the fuel filler cap. Talking of aero, have a look at this rear wing. Massive, clearly very well designed, but perhaps not designed with aerodynamics specifically in mind, because, well, they've had to add this little rubber gurney flap along the top here. Then there's the strut brace, except it's not really doing any bracing. According to Mini, it's just to stop luggage falling into the front area of the cockpit. There is actually extra stiffening around the rear of the car, but it's not to do with that.
Anyway, back to the driving.
So the ride itself is good. The straight line speed is impressive. The trouble is, well, when you get to corners, things start to fall apart. The steering feels quite heavy when you first get in, but then lightens up, and it doesn't really give you a lot of confidence when you get to the corners because, well, it just struggles to let you know what's going on, and then you try and put some power through those front wheels and the mechanical diff hooks up and the front just hunts all over the road. I mean, the body kit might be as spectacular as a Lamborghini Aventador, but you need to treat this as though it's as wide as a Lamborghini Aventador as well, because at any moment it can just be pulled left or right over the road on a whim almost.
And this for the UK is actually quite a smooth road. But even here, little bumps, mild cambers, or seemingly invisible imperfections in the tarmac are all kryptonite to this hot hatch if you're trying to accelerate. Torque steer and tramlining are your constant companions.
I'm afraid it's one of those cars that you can come into the same corner twice and it will do totally different things. In fact, you can probably go into the same corner 10 times and it will do different things, because a combination of the firm suspension, the added camber, and then trying to put all that torque through the front wheels, nearly 100 pounds-foot more torque, 332 pounds-foot in total, but 100 pounds-foot more than a standard JCW. It is quite the live wire, and that's being kind. The steering, because it seemed to unweight and go fairly light in the corners, I actually was searching initially for a way of firming it up, taking some of the assistance out maybe, but there are no modes in this. It's the GP's way or the highway.
Don't get me wrong, there is a lot of grip, but it takes a bit of a leap of faith and a smooth road to really access it. I'd certainly be intrigued to drive it on a track. And what about that 8-speed automatic gearbox? Well, sadly, it's really rather as frustrating in reality as it is in concept. You crave control and responsiveness in a car like this, and even using the eye-catching 3D printed paddles, this box can't quite keep pace with the rabid terrier nature of the rest of the car.
It's just a bit soft, particularly on the downshifts. Just not quite as incisive as you want. Having said that, I can sort of see why they might not have even wanted to fit a manual gearbox to this, because frankly you are so busy over the bumps and cambers that taking a hand off the wheel whilst it's trying to do that isn't really a very good idea.
What then to conclude about the Mini JCW GP? Well, at around £35,000 it is expensive for a Mini, but it's not actually that expensive in the realms of crazy limited edition hot hatches. And this is a limited edition, with only 3,000 being produced worldwide and just 575 due to come to the UK. This is car number 85, if you hadn't guessed. I like the way it looks, and there's no denying its potency, but as you can probably tell, the latest Mini JCW GP is, to put it politely, a wild ride. Although this car is wearing hand-cut tyres, it was the old Pirelli advert that kept coming to mind. Power is nothing without control. It just feels unresolved.
A bit like they've thrown a lot of potentially good parts at it, but then not really developed it, certainly for the average British road. Perhaps it works slightly better on a track, but even so, I'm not sure it would be as good as its predecessor. It's strange to find a car in this day and age that's so unruly to drive. There are lots of good cars that can just end up being, well, a bit beige. This certainly isn't that. It's not good, but there's a challenge, an interest in trying to tame it.
Whether it's the looks or the driving experience, you can't accuse this car of being dull, and there's certainly something to be said for that.